The one thing that I knew as a child is that there was no hope for me of it stopping. My father was my role model, and I did adore him, and I did love him. What happened to me, he started coming into my room when I was 5, until I was 18. And the one thing that I knew as a child is that there was no hope for me of it stopping. And as I look back, I was right. There was not one person who would have been able to help me. And so as a survival tool, I dissociated. I call it split. What happens to a child who is traumatized and terrorized, if you know that it's going to keep happening, there's no way you can go to school and get A's and play marbles and play tag and ride your bike home and be a happy child if you know what's waiting for you and that you have no power to stop that. My eldest sister Gwen, who is also an incest survivor, I watched her be beaten and sent away to a boarding school. I'd never heard of a boarding school. When I was 7, I just knew that she went away. So I learned very quickly that to be defiant is not a way that I should go. So that took that tool away from me. And so what I was just able to do as a child, which is very common, is to, I call it split my mind. And I split into what I call a day child and a night child. And it's very real to me. I don't remember this, but I believe it happened. I believe that somewhere in my mind, as a young child, I said, okay, you stay in the room, and you take what you have to take, and I'll go out, and I'll be very successful. And when I'm free and successful, I'll come back and get you and save you. And I believe I struck a deal. So I did. I went out, and I was successful in everything I tried. I graduated with Phi Beta Kappa honors from college. I was on the ski team. I was in the modern choir. I was homecoming queen. I was Miss America. I was named the outstanding woman speaker. I mean, everything I tried, I was just successful, successful, successful. The problem is that I didn't want to go back and get her. I hated and loathed and despised her more than anyone I could ever dislike. I wanted her to go away. And instead of going back and welcoming her into my life, I wanted her dead. And I think that my recovery would not have been as difficult as it was if I had been able to have compassion for the child I call the night child. And because I could not have compassion for her, and because I didn't want her ever to be in my life or ever acknowledge her, she played havoc with me. And I do believe that. I believe she's the one. I think I characterize it as a child going in and saying, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," and the mother said, "I'm busy now, I'm busy now." And the child goes back in and says, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," and pulls on her dress, and she says, "I'm busy now." So the child goes and takes the best piece of crystal she can find and crashes it on the floor. Now she has her mother's attention. And this is what began to happen to me as an adult. When I was 39, I went into physical paralysis and was unable to move. My head would work, but my body wouldn't work. And I was hospitalized for the better part of 3 months in 3 different hospitals. I went to the Mayo Clinic, and they said, "We can find nothing wrong with you." And I had paralysis spells for 11 years, from age 39 to 51. And finally, I didn't know what else to do, so finally at age 40 I went into therapy, and I began to start dealing with what had happened to me from age 5 to age 18. You live a lifetime of isolation, and it's something that I used even as an adult. I chose a career that was isolating. I chose to be a public speaker. I got on a plane by myself. I went to the hotel by myself. I stayed in the hotel by myself. I went for 1 hour. I was with people, and then I go back to the hotel, very isolating. I grew up. You don't have relationships with anybody. All I had was my father. And that's like a sugar pill laced with arsenic. I never had a relationship with my mother or my sisters. You can't. The secret is too huge and too intense. I looked like I fit in school. I was homecoming queen. I was constantly being voted everything. I looked like I fit. But when people say, are you going to go back to your high school reunion? Why would I go back? I don't feel any close connection with anybody. Were you going to go back to your college reunion? Why would I go back to my college reunion? I don't feel a strong connection. I never just could allow myself to be known, because you keep so much of yourself private, because you believe, because I believed, as almost every sexual abuse survivor believes, if you knew this about me, you would never want to speak to me again. And no matter how many honors I won, and I won them, here's this other part of me. This is who I am. And then, but if you knew this about me, you would never want to be with me again. We don't, most of us, unless it's rape by a stranger, but if we are violated by someone who is a trusted person, it's the only person then that we have. It's a connection. It's the only connection that we have. What I wanted to my father's death was his daytime love, and I never got that. Not one day of a daytime father's love. I just got him at night, and that's all I had, and that's all I had to cling to until I met Larry Adler when I was 15. And then I think everything really began to change, because I fell so deeply in love with Larry. I was a sophomore in high school and he was a senior. I thought I would fall in love with a tall, blonde Swede with blue eyes, and I walk into student council and here's this kind of swarthy complexioned, brown-eyed, and it was just as if my heart just left my body. And our love was so deep and so intense, and he never betrayed me. In the almost 40 years we've been married, he's never betrayed me. I could trust him. Even when I did crazy things like marrying somebody else. He just has never let me down. And I think I'm unusually fortunate to have found someone at such a young age that I could love and who would love me in return. Larry has loved me unconditionally. Believe me, I've put him through every test there is. There isn't a test I haven't put him through. And one of the first tests was marrying somebody else. That's a very big test. And I married into a situation that was an abusive one, not because my first husband, I'm not going to say our relationship was abusive. Was he abusive? No. Was our relationship abusive? We were oil and water. And I would have continued doing that. We choose because we feel unlovable. We have to marry into relationships where we're not treated well because we don't believe we deserve to be treated well. And fortunately, I had enough courage to leave that marriage in 3 months. And I am forever grateful that I had the courage to do that. And I went to New York, where my career was, and I was living there feeling like the worst person. Miss Americas don't get divorced. You just don't get divorced. And after the divorce was on the front page of the paper, I got a letter from Larry, and he said, of all the things we have been together, most of all, we've been best friends. If I can be a friend to you at this time, please call. If not, let this letter be as a leaf in the wind. And I just started crying, and I was living with another Miss America, and I said, I just can't call him. Look what I've done. He was getting ready to ask me to marry him, and I married somebody else. And she said, he wants you to call him. And I did. And we got back together, and we were going to be married. And then I started running from him again. And I didn't have anything to do with him. Then he starts going with somebody else named Marilyn. All of his girlfriends were always named Marilyn. And then I'd come back to Denver, and we were going to get married again. And then I'd get on a plane and move back to New York, and I wouldn't return his calls. And it was just craziness, and I had no understanding of why I was sabotaging my life, and I was. And because I had split, because I had dissociated, because I had repressed the memories of incest, I didn't know what was running my life. And the same year that I met Larry, I met a youth minister, and for 9 years, he just kept sort of watching what I was doing, and he would say to himself, that didn't make a lot of sense what she just did, but he didn't think too much about it until I married somebody other than Larry. And then he said to himself, there's something here that I don't know about. And then when I divorced after 3 months, he said, okay, after 9 years of watching what she's doing, I now believe she's trying to destroy herself. I just have to figure out why. And that's when he began asking searching questions. And one day, as unbelievable as it was for my family, I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. They didn't bring families up on the stage. They took one look at my family. They went over the midnight hour. They paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. They knew this. They knew. And they said, bring the Derbur family up. They parted the waters in the... They walked up on the stage. I mean, it must have taken them a good 3 minutes to get to this. We want you to meet America. We want you to meet the Derbur family. These are the 4 beautiful daughters and the mother and the father, because we were a picture-perfect family. Incest in our family? Who would have even thought of the word in the 1950s? And he just asked me the question and saved my life by doing it. I think he asked, did your father ever come into your room at night? And I never answered the question. I just started crying. And there it was. There it was. And the reason that I kept running from Larry is because I didn't feel worthy of him. If he knew who I really was, then he wouldn't want me. And then I had to tell Larry. And you ought to try telling someone that you love, who thinks you're the most perfect. He's always felt I was just perfect. And you ought to try to find the words to tell him that you're not who he has believed that you've been all these years. And I just always thought the youth minister would tell him. It never occurred to me that he would make me tell him. And we had Larry fly to California, and when he came in and sat down, I just started crying. And I'm waiting for Dee Dee to tell him. And oh, this minister is so wise. It's a part of the healing process. You don't tell somebody else's story, ever. You never tell somebody else's story. It was not his job to tell Larry. It was mine, and he knew that. I don't know how he knew that, but he knew that. And he knew it's the first step in the healing process to try to find those words. Well, the youth minister said, Marilyn has something to tell you. I couldn't even raise my head. I could never have looked Larry in the eye to try to tell him that I'm not who you think I am at all. I'm a really bad person. And I don't know what words I used, but when I don't know how he ever could have put it together, but he just came over and just took me in his arms, and he just said, I understand everything now. I understand everything now. Larry always understood the big picture. He always understood how that would impact our sexual relationship, which shut down completely twice. He understood that that would impact absolutely every aspect of my life. He never said to me, how could you love your father? How could you love your father? Which people still say to me. How could you love your father? Larry would say, and Larry despised my father, understandably. And Larry would just say, he's your father. He's your father. And when I finally went into full-time therapy and I'm trying to figure out, I hate my father, I love my father humiliated and degraded me. I wanted to find one word to describe my feelings. This is how I feel about my father, because people who knew wanted me to say, this is how I feel about my father. Everybody wanted me to say, I hate my father. And I know that's what people wanted me to say. And I just needed one sentence, this is how I feel about my father. And And finally Larry said to me one day, he said, you know, you take the white off of a golf ball and you see all of these rubber bands completely intertwined. He said, you can't pull one of them out and say that I hate my father, or you can't just pull another one out. They're just, he said, this is how you feel about your father. This is how you, and I said, that's how I feel about my father. I have all those feelings. I have all of those mixed up, crazy mixed up feelings. And I continued to love my father until I was 56. Until I received a letter from a woman who told me that my father had never stopped. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75. They never stop. They never stop. Is there an exception to that? I'm sure there is. Would I trust my child with any kind of a sexual predator? Absolutely never. Not for 10 seconds. My mother walked down the hallway one night. I was about 11 or 12, and my father always came in late at night. Late meaning 10, 11, sometimes midnight. And he'd been in my room for maybe a half hour, and all of a sudden I heard footsteps coming down. I could hear the first step, and then the second step, very, very, very slowly, and then the third step. And she was now about 12 feet from my door, and I waited to hear another step, and it was a dramatic moment when everything stopped for all three of us. All three of us knew exactly what each one of us was thinking and knew. It's the only time I ever felt my father afraid. He just stopped. And I thought, it's going to be over. She's going to come in. And we waited for that dramatic moment. And then I heard a step, up the steps, and up the steps, and up the steps. And I knew she would never come through that door. And I knew she would never, ever come to help me. Do I believe she knew? Absolutely. I had a reporter say to me, did your mother know? And I said, it went on in our home for 18 years. And the reporter said, but did your mother know? And I said, it went on in our home for 18 years. Would you know if something went on in your home for 18 years? Of course she knew. Did she repress it? Is that how I learned to dissociate? Maybe. Maybe. Maybe she just couldn't deal with it, so she just put it somewhere and wouldn't think about it. But I do believe she made a decision. I believe she made a choice, and she didn't choose me. When I felt an obsession to talk with her, and it wasn't I need to talk to my mother, it's I have to talk to my mother. I was 48 years old, and my father had died a year earlier, and I all of a sudden just had to confront her and find out why she never helped me, why she never stopped him. And so I went over and I just sobbed and sobbed. I just couldn't get the words out. I just that deep kind of gut-wrenching sobbing. And when I finally was able to get, they were not sentences, they were words. When I finally was able to just get the words out, I looked up and she was sitting there with her arms folded and she said, I don't believe you. It's in your fantasy. I never expected that. Never. I was so stunned. I stopped crying. It was as if she had just slapped me hard across the face. And one of the important things that I want people to understand is that it's never too late to be a mother. If when I went to her after my father had died, if I had gone to her as I did and cried from the depths of my being, I wanted her to be my mother. I wanted her to say, I am so desperately sorry I wasn't there for her. I wanted her to weep with me. If she had done that from the depths of her being, not a, oh, I'm so sorry, or a boo-hoo, I mean a real depth of despair, I would have had a mother. If she had done that at any point along the way, I would have had a mother. It's never too late, in my opinion. It never happened. And to her death at age 88, she was never able to say to me, I am so desperately sorry for what you've been through. Where was I? I don't know how this could have happened for so long in our home. She never said any of the words that I needed to hear. I didn't get a mother and I didn't get a father. But, oh, did I marry into a family. I have a husband that cherishes and gives me unconditional love. I had a mother-in-law and a father-in-law who gave me unconditional love, although I was not able to tell them until they were in their 80s. I had too much shame. Even when I was in a psychiatric ward, even when I was in paralysis, even, they saw me go through my craziness, and I thought it was okay if they just thought I had craziness. That was better than them knowing I was an incest survivor, because I could never tell them that, because then they would not love me anymore. That belief system goes on for way too long. And I finally, the only reason I ended up telling them when they were in their 80s is because I was having deep paralysis spells. And my mother told my mother-in-law, they were best friends, which was so hard for me, that the reason I was having paralysis spells was greed over the estate. And what my mother didn't know is that my mother-in-law would ever discuss it with me. And I went over one day and I called my mother-in-law Nan, and she said, my darling, your mother has told me what these paralysis spells are about, greed over the estate. And I just thought, oh, isn't my mother good? And my father-in-law had the most incredible response. He rose and he said, I will never speak to your mother again. Oh, how validating is that? And I said, thank you, Papa. But this is not about you and my mother. This is about me and my mother. You can be friends with her. It's okay with me. But so protective. This is what we want to hear. I'm here for you.